Some proposals come with flowers and bended knees. Others come with chains still warm from a man's wrists, and a voice that's never learned to beg. When Marcus told the sheriff's daughter he'd marry her, he wasn't asking for permission. He was declaring war on the man who'd spent 15 years teaching them both they were worthless. The same man who called her too fat to love and him too black to matter. But what Sheriff Kane didn't know was that his cruelty had created something he never intended. Two broken souls who'd learned to see beauty in each other's scars. The paintbrush trembled in Rebecca Kane's hand, but not from fear, from fury. She sat in the dusty attic above her father's office, hidden behind stacks of old law books and forgotten arrest warrants, painting the only truth she knew how to tell. On the canvas before her, a girl with soft curves and gentle eyes stood in a field of wildflowers, arms outstretched to catch falling stars. It was everything Rebecca would never be allowed to be. Beautiful, she whispered to herself, because no one else ever would. Below her, she could hear her father's voice booming through the floorboards, Sheriff Kane holding court with his deputies, probably bragging about his latest arrest or complaining about the burden of his unmarriable daughter. "That girl eats enough for 3 men," his voice carried up through the cracks. 22 years old and still no prospects. Can't blame the men. Who wants to feed a woman built like a barn? Laughter erupted from the room below. Rebecca's hand stilled on the brush. She'd heard it 1,000 times before. The jokes, the comments, the way her father introduced her to visitors as "my daughter," the one who likes to eat instead of the one who paints like an angel. But today, something was different. Today, through the small attic window, she could see Marcus. He stood in the courtyard behind the sheriff's office, splitting wood with an axe that seemed too small for his broad shoulders. Even from this distance, she could see the concentration on his face, the way he moved with quiet dignity despite the iron shackles around his ankles. Marcus, the boy her father had bought 15 years ago and raised like a workhorse instead of a son. Rebecca had watched him grow from a scared 10-year-old who flinched at every sound to a man of 25 who carried himself with more grace than any free person she knew. She'd seen him take beatings without crying, work 16-hour days without complaining, and still find the strength to feed stray dogs when no one was looking. She'd also seen him watching her, not the way other men watched her, with disgust or pity or cruel amusement. Marcus watched her the way she watched sunsets, like something worth paying attention to. It had started when they were children. She'd catch him staring from across the yard while she read on the porch, or notice him pause in his work when she walked by. Never bold enough to speak, they both knew the rules about slaves talking to the sheriff's daughter, but always aware, always seeing. The first time she'd realized he noticed her paintings was 3 years ago. She'd left a canvas propped against the back porch to dry, a landscape of the creek where she used to swim before her father decided she was too big to be seen in undergarments. When she came back an hour later, the painting was exactly where she'd left it. But beside it, carved carefully into the wooden porch rail, was a single word: beautiful. Her father had blamed the vandalism on local troublemakers and had Marcus sand the word away the next morning. But Rebecca had seen the way Marcus's eyes lingered on the smooth wood where his carving had been, and she'd known. Someone had finally seen her art. Really seen it. After that, she'd started leaving her paintings where he might notice them. Never obviously, just casually positioned where his work might take him. And every time, she'd find some small sign that he'd been there. A wildflower laid across the canvas. A rock arranged in the shape of a heart. Once, impossibly, a perfect butterfly drawn in the dust beside her easel. They'd never spoken about it. Never acknowledged their silent conversation. But Rebecca had started painting differently. Instead of just her pain, she'd begun painting hope. Instead of just her loneliness, she'd begun painting connection. She was painting love, even when she didn't fully understand what it was. Now, watching Marcus work in the courtyard below, she felt that familiar flutter in her chest. The same feeling she got when she mixed the perfect shade of blue, or when a painting finally captured exactly what she'd been trying to say. Rebecca. Her father's voice cut through her thoughts like a whip crack. Get down, hey. She set down her brush, wiped her paint-stained fingers on her apron, and made her way downstairs. The deputies were still gathered in her father's office, their faces flushed with whiskey and self-importance. Sheriff Kane stood behind his desk, all 6 feet of him radiating the kind of authority that came from wearing a badge for 20 years. His gray hair was slicked back, his mustache perfectly waxed, his uniform pressed and pristine. He looked like a man who'd never doubted his own righteousness. There she is, he announced as Rebecca appeared in the doorway. My artistic daughter. The word artistic came out like a curse. Show the men that painting you've been working on, he continued. The one with all the flowers and nonsense. Rebecca's stomach clenched. It's not finished, Papa. Neither is a lot of things, but we still got to look at them. He gestured impatiently. Go on. Get it. She climbed back to the attic on unsteady legs, retrieved the canvas, and brought it down. The deputies gathered around as she reluctantly held it up. For a moment, there was silence. Then Deputy Mills whistled low. Well, I'll be damned. That's real pretty, Rebecca. Pretty enough to sell, added Deputy Foster. My wife would pay good money for something like that to hang in our parlor. For just a moment, Rebecca's heart soared. Someone else saw beauty in her work. Someone else understood. Sell. Her father's voice cut through her hope like a blade. Who's got money to waste on pictures of flowers? Rebecca, you spend too much time on this foolishness when you should be learning to cook or clean or do something useful. He turned to his deputies. See what I mean? 22 years old and her head's full of paint fumes instead of practical sense. No wonder she can't find a husband. The men chuckled uncomfortably. Rebecca felt her face burn with familiar shame. Maybe if she spent less time painting and more time walking away from the dinner table, Sheriff Kane continued, she might actually attract a man worth having. More laughter. Louder this time. Rebecca clutched the painting to her chest and fled. She ran past the kitchen, past the parlor, out the back door and into the courtyard. She didn't stop until she reached the old oak tree at the edge of the property, where she collapsed against the trunk and finally let the tears come. Through her blurred vision, she saw a shadow fall across the grass. Marcus stood 10 feet away, axe still in his hands, sweat glistening on his dark skin. His shackles caught the afternoon light as he set the tool aside and took a careful step closer. Miss Rebecca, he said quietly. His voice was deeper than she remembered, rougher from years of staying silent. You all right? She looked up at him, really looked, and saw something in his eyes she'd never seen directed at her before. Not pity, not amusement, not disgust. Anger. He was angry for her. The painting, she whispered, holding up the canvas. Do you think it's foolish? Marcus studied the image, the girl in the wildflower field, arms outstretched, catching stars. His expression was serious, thoughtful. I think, he said slowly, it's the most beautiful thing I ever seen. And Rebecca Kane, who had spent 22 years believing she was too much of everything wrong and not enough of anything right, felt something crack open in her chest. Something that might have been hope. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Marcus's words over and over. It's the most beautiful thing I ever seen. Not the painting. He'd been looking at her when he said it. When dawn broke, she found herself back in the attic, but this time she wasn't painting. She was watching through the window as Marcus began his morning chores. Today, instead of his usual route around the property, he walked closer to the house. Close enough that when he glanced up, their eyes met through the glass. He didn't look away. Neither did she. It was Sheriff Kane's voice that broke the spell. Marcus. Get in here. Rebecca watched Marcus's shoulders tense. He set down the water bucket and walked toward the office, his shackles scraping against the wooden steps. She crept to the top of the stairs, listening. I've got a buyer coming today, her father's voice boomed. Mr. Blackwood from the plantation up north. He's looking for strong workers, and you're getting too comfortable here. Rebecca's heart stopped. I've raised you decent, Sheriff Kane continued. Fed you, housed you, kept you from the worst of what happens to your kind. But you're a man now, and I got no use for a man I can't fully control. Yes, sir, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite what had to be terror. Don't sound so calm about it, boy. Blackwood's plantation ain't like here. They work men to death up there. Maybe you should have thought about that before you started getting ideas. What ideas, sir? A long pause. Then Sheriff Kane's voice, lower and more dangerous. You think I don't see you watching my daughter? You think I don't notice how you linger around when she's outside? Rebecca pressed her hand to her mouth. Sir, I never. Never what? Never looked at a white woman like she was something you could have? Never forgot your place so completely that you think you got a right to even breathe the same air? Another pause. Rebecca could hear her own heartbeat. She's unmarriable as she is, Sheriff Kane continued. Fat, foolish, head full of paint and nonsense. But she's still my blood, and my blood don't mix with slaves. I understand, sir. Do you? Because tomorrow morning, you'll be gone. And if I ever hear you've been within 50 miles of this town again, I'll have you hunted down like the animal you are. Rebecca heard footsteps. Marcus was being dismissed. She flew down the stairs, not caring about the noise, and burst through the back door just as Marcus emerged from the office. He saw her face and knew she'd heard everything. For a moment, they stood there in the morning light, really looking at each other for the first time without hiding, without pretending, without fear of who might see. He's selling you, she whispered. Tomorrow morning. She stepped closer. Because of me. Marcus's eyes were steady, unflinching. Because of him. And that's when Rebecca understood something that would change everything. Marcus wasn't afraid of her father. He was angry at him. Just like she was. They stood in the courtyard as the sun climbed higher. Two people who had spent years dancing around a truth neither had dared to speak. Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest. Not the familiar flutter of hope, but something stronger. Something that felt like lightning before it strikes. What will you do? She asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face like he was memorizing it. I've been thinking about that all night, he said finally. And I keep coming back to the same answer. Which is? He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine scars on his hands from years of hard work, close enough that she could smell the soap he used and see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I'm not going. Rebecca's breath caught. Marcus, you can't just refuse. He'll what? Beat me? He's done that. Chain me. I'm already chained. Sell me anyway. Marcus's voice was steady, but underneath it was steel. Miss Rebecca, I've been his property for 15 years, and in all that time, the only thing that made it bearable was knowing you were somewhere in that house, painting pictures of things too beautiful for this ugly world. Her heart hammered against her ribs. You don't understand, she whispered. If you stay, if you fight him, then I fight him. Marcus's voice was quiet but certain. I'm done watching him hurt you. I'm done pretending I don't see what he does to your spirit every day. Rebecca stared at him. In 15 years, no one had ever stood up for her. Not once. He's my father, Marcus. And yo. I'm what? His voice was soft, but his eyes were blazing. His property, his slave, something less than human. She shook her head quickly. No, that's not. Then what am I, Miss Rebecca? Because I need to know before I do what I'm about to do. Her mouth went dry. What are you about to do? Marcus reached up slowly, giving her time to step away if she wanted to. When she didn't move, he touched her face with fingers that were rough from work but gentle as butterfly wings. I'm about to ask the sheriff's daughter to marry me. The world went silent. Rebecca felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. Marcus. I know what you're thinking, he said quickly. I know all the reasons why it's impossible. I'm a slave. You're white. Your father would kill us both. The law wouldn't recognize it. The whole town would lose their minds. She nodded mutely. But here's what I know, Marcus continued, his thumb brushing across her cheek. I know that for 15 years, you've been the only light in my darkness. I know that your paintings make me believe in beauty even when everything around us is ugly. I know that when your father tears you down, I want to build you back up. And I know that tomorrow, when they try to drag me away from here, I'm going to fight. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. I'm going to fight, Marcus repeated, because you're worth fighting for. Because you deserve to be chosen, not discarded. Because someone needs to tell you what your father never will, that you're not too much of anything. You're exactly enough of everything good. A sob escaped her throat. So I'm asking, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. Will you marry me, Rebecca Kane? Not because we have to, not because we're running out of options, but because I love you. Because I've loved you since we were children, and I'll love you until the day I die. Rebecca looked into his eyes and saw 15 years of silent devotion. 15 years of watching her from afar, protecting her in small ways, seeing her when no one else bothered to look. Your father hates me, Marcus said softly. He hates what I am, where I come from, the color of my skin. But I'll still marry you, Rebecca. I'll marry you and spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget how worthy you are of love. The tears were flowing freely now. Marcus, how? Even if I said yes, how could we possibly? There's a preacher 3 towns over, old man named Samuel, who married my parents before they were sold apart. He don't care about laws that say love is wrong. Rebecca's heart lurched. Your parents? Marcus nodded. They had one day together as husband and wife, before the auction block separated them forever. My mama told me it was the most beautiful day of her life, even knowing what was coming. He took her hands in his. I'm not promising you easy, Rebecca. I'm promising you real. I'm promising you a man who sees your paintings and sees miracles, who sees your body and sees home, who sees your heart and sees everything worth protecting in this world. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 22 years of loneliness and shame pressing against the possibility of something she'd never dared to dream. What about my father? She whispered. What about him? He'll never let us. He don't get a say in who you love, Marcus said firmly. He's spent your whole life telling you you're not good enough, not pretty enough, not thin enough, not worth enough. But that's his shame talking, not truth. Rebecca opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked. She saw strength that had been forged in fire, kindness that had survived cruelty, love that had grown in impossible soil. I paint because it's the only way I can tell the truth, she said quietly. Then tell me the truth now. Rebecca took a shaky breath. In her mind, she could see her father's face when he discovered what she'd done. She could see the town's reaction, the whispers, the scandal. But she could also see something else. She could see herself waking up beside a man who thought her paintings were miracles. She could see a life where her art wasn't dismissed as foolishness but celebrated as gift. She could see a love that didn't ask her to be smaller, quieter, less. Yes, she whispered. Marcus's eyes widened. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Her voice grew stronger. I'll marry you, and I don't care who hates it. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus smiled. really smiled, and Rebecca thought it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, even more beautiful than her paintings. They left before dawn, slipping away like shadows while Sheriff Kane slept off his whiskey. Rebecca had never ridden a horse before, but Marcus lifted her onto the old mare he'd borrowed from a sympathetic stable hand, then climbed up behind her. His arms around her waist felt like the safest place in the world, even as they rode toward the most dangerous thing either of them had ever done. The preacher lived in a cabin so small it seemed to lean against the pine trees for support. Samuel was ancient, his dark skin mapped with wrinkles, his white beard reaching nearly to his chest. But his eyes were sharp and kind when he opened the door. "You the boy wrote me the letter?" he asked Marcus. "Yes, sir." Samuel looked at Rebecca, taking in her nervous face and paint-stained fingers. "You sure about this, child? Marriage ain't something you can take back." Rebecca glanced at Marcus, then back at the old man. "I've never been more sure of anything." Samuel nodded slowly. "Then let's make it right before God." The ceremony lasted 5 minutes. No flowers, no music, no family. Just two souls promising to love each other while the morning light streamed through a cracked window. "Do you, Marcus, take this woman to be your wife, to love and protect her all the days of your life?" "I do." "Do you, Rebecca, take this man to be your husband, to honor and stand beside him no matter what comes?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the Almighty, I pronounce you husband and wife." Marcus kissed her softly, and Rebecca felt like she was finally, truly alive. They made it home by noon, hands clasped, hearts soaring. Sheriff Kane was waiting in the courtyard. His face was a mask of cold fury that made Rebecca's blood freeze. He held his rifle loosely in his hands, but his finger rested near the trigger. "Get away from my daughter, boy." Marcus dismounted first, then helped Rebecca down. He kept himself between her and the gun. "She's my wife now, sir." The words hung in the air like thunder before lightning. Sheriff Kane's face went white, then red, then a shade of purple Rebecca had never seen before. "Your wife." His voice was barely a whisper. "Your wife. We were married this morning by Preacher Samuel." "That ain't legal. That ain't nothing but an abomination." Marcus stood straighter. "It's legal in the eyes of God." Sheriff Kane raised the rifle. "God don't recognize marriages between animals and humans." Rebecca stepped around Marcus before he could stop her. "Papa, please. You are no daughter of mine." His voice was ice. "You want to live like an animal? Then you can live like one. Get off my property. Both of you. Now." Rebecca felt the world tilt. "Papa, this is my home. This was your home. Now you got nothing. No family, no money, no roof over your head." His eyes were pitiless. "You made your choice. Now live with it." Marcus took Rebecca's trembling hand. "We will," he said quietly, "and we'll be happier than you ever were." They walked away together, carrying nothing but love and the clothes on their backs. But as they reached the edge of the property, Rebecca heard her father's final words, thrown like stones at their retreating figures. "You'll be back, girl. When you're starving and cold and that boy realizes what a burden you really are, you'll come crawling back." Rebecca squeezed Marcus's hand tighter. She never looked back. They found shelter in an abandoned cabin at the edge of Millfield, 3 towns away from everything they'd ever known. The roof leaked. The windows were cracked. Mice had made nests in the corners, and the floorboards groaned with every step. But when Marcus carried Rebecca over the threshold, she looked around at the broken walls and saw possibility. "It's perfect," she whispered. He laughed, the sound echoing off the bare walls. "Rebecca, there's holes in the ceiling and no stove." "Then we'll patch the holes and find a stove." She turned in his arms, eyes bright with determination. "It's ours, Marcus. No one can take it from us or tell us we don't belong here." That first winter nearly broke them. Marcus found work at the lumber mill, but the pay was barely enough for food. Rebecca tried to sell her paintings in town, but people looked at her with suspicion. A white woman married to a black man, living like outcasts at the edge of civilization. Some nights, they went to bed hungry, but they never went to bed alone. Rebecca would curl against Marcus's chest, listening to his heartbeat, and paint pictures in her mind of the life they were building. He would stroke her hair and tell her stories his mother had told him, stories of people who loved each other so fiercely that even slavery couldn't break their bond. "You cold?" he'd ask on the nights when the wind whistled through the gaps in the walls. "Not with you, hey?" It was during one of those cold nights that Rebecca first drew Marcus's hands. She'd been watching him whittle by candlelight, carving a wooden spoon from a piece of oak he'd brought home from the mill. His fingers moved with such careful precision, such gentle strength, that she found herself reaching for her charcoal. "Hold still," she whispered. "What are you doing?" "Drawing the hands that built our home." Marcus paused, looking down at his calloused palms, the scars from years of hard labor. "These old things. These beautiful things." Rebecca's voice was soft but certain. "These hands that fix our roof when it leaks. That chop wood to keep me warm. That hold me when I cry." She looked up at him. "These hands that chose me." When she finished the drawing, Marcus stared at it for a long time. "That's really how you see them. That's really how they are." He kissed her then, soft and deep, and Rebecca thought that maybe they didn't need anything else in the world but this small cabin, this flickering candle, this love that had survived everything. Spring came, and with it, hope. Rebecca's paintings began to sell. Not in Millfield. The people there still whispered and stared, but in the bigger towns where Marcus delivered lumber. Travelers would see her work and pay good money for portraits of their children, landscapes of their farms, still lifes that reminded them of home. But it was her paintings of Marcus that people remembered most. She painted his hands dozens of times, holding tools, cradling injured birds, reaching toward her with infinite tenderness. She painted his eyes, full of wisdom and kindness that seemed impossible in a man who'd endured so much cruelty. She painted his smile, the one that transformed his whole face and made her believe in miracles. "Why do you always paint me?" he asked one afternoon, watching her work on a canvas that showed him reading by the window. "Because you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "I'm not beautiful, Rebecca. I'm scarred and rough and perfect." She set down her brush and looked at him seriously. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" He shook his head. "I see a man who was beaten but never broken, who was told he was worthless but never believed it, who was given every reason to be cruel but chose kindness instead." Her voice caught. "I see everything good in this world, Marcus. That's why I paint you." By their second anniversary, word had spread about the couple in the cabin at the edge of town. Not gossip this time. Something else. People had started coming to them. First, it was Sarah Mills, whose husband had been drinking away their farm. She'd heard that Rebecca was a good listener and Marcus was a man of wisdom. She came for tea and ended up staying for hours, crying into her hands while Rebecca painted a small portrait of her children and Marcus spoke quietly about forgiveness and second chances. Then came old Pete, whose son hadn't spoken to him in 5 years over a land dispute. He brought his fiddle and played while Marcus worked in the garden and Rebecca painted, and somehow, by the end of the afternoon, he'd decided to swallow his pride and make amends. Then the widow Thompson, heartbroken and lost after her husband's death. Then the Johnson boys, fighting over their inheritance. Then Martha Stevens, convinced her daughter hated her for mistakes she'd made years ago. They came with broken hearts and broken dreams and broken relationships. And somehow, in that little cabin with the patched roof and the hand-built furniture, they found pieces of themselves they'd thought were lost forever. Rebecca would listen and paint, portraits that showed people not as they saw themselves, but as love saw them. Marcus would work with his hands and speak with his heart, offering wisdom earned through suffering and hope learned through love. "How do you do it?" Sarah Mills asked one day, watching Rebecca paint a picture of her husband not as the drunk he'd become, but as the young man she'd fallen in love with. "How do you see the good in people when they can't see it themselves?" Rebecca looked across the room at Marcus, who was teaching Sarah's youngest boy to carve a wooden horse. "Someone saw the good in me when I couldn't see it myself," she said simply. "It changes everything." Word spread further. People came from neighboring towns, then neighboring counties, not for magic or miracles, but for something rarer, a place where broken things were mended not with judgment, but with love. The cabin at the edge of Millfield became something no one had planned but everyone needed, a sanctuary for hearts that had forgotten how to heal. 20 years passed like a gentle river. Rebecca's hair turned silver early, just like her mother's had. Marcus's back grew stiff from decades of hard work, but his hands remained steady and strong. They moved slower now, but they moved together. Two people who had learned that love wasn't just a feeling, but a choice made new each morning. Their cabin had grown too. Marcus had added rooms over the years, a proper kitchen where Rebecca could cook for the endless stream of visitors, a sitting room with chairs built for comfort, a studio where the light was perfect for painting. But the heart of their home remained that first small room where they'd survived their first winter, where Rebecca had first drawn Marcus's hands by candlelight. People still came, more now than ever. Young couples on the verge of divorce would arrive bitter and leave holding hands. Parents estranged from their children would find words they'd forgotten how to say. Neighbors who'd feuded for years would discover that pride was a poor substitute for friendship. "How do you do it?" people always asked. "How do you fix what's broken?" Rebecca would smile and continue painting, portraits that showed people as love saw them, not as anger or hurt or disappointment painted them. "We don't fix anything," she'd say gently. "We just remind folks what they already knew before the world convinced them to forget." Marcus, now gray at the temples but still strong as an oak, would nod from his chair by the window where he carved small gifts for their visitors, wooden birds, toy horses, smooth stones painted with encouraging words. "Love ain't about being perfect," he'd add, his voice warm as honey. "It's about being real, about seeing each other's broken places and saying, 'That's okay. I got broken places too.'" Rebecca painted less of Marcus now, not because she loved him less, but because she'd painted him so many times she could recreate every line of his face from memory. Instead, she painted their visitors, their stories, their transformations. Her studio walls were covered with portraits of couples who'd found their way back to each other, families reunited, hearts made whole. But her favorite painting, the one that hung above their bed, was still that first sketch of Marcus's hands. Weathered now, yellowed at the edges, but still perfect in its simple truth. These were the hands that had chosen her, built their home, and healed so many others. On quiet evenings, when no visitors filled their chairs, Rebecca and Marcus would sit on their porch watching the sun set over the hills. She'd sketch in her lap while he whittled, comfortable in the silence that only comes between people who've said everything that needs saying and discovered that love speaks in quiet moments too. "You ever regret it?" Marcus asked one evening, his voice soft in the twilight. "Regret what?" "Leaving your father's house. Giving up that life for this one." Rebecca looked around at their modest home, their simple life, their love-worn hands intertwined on the porch swing Marcus had built for her 60th birthday. "Marcus," she said, her voice full of quiet wonder, "I never had a life until I found you." He squeezed her hand, and they watched the stars appear one by one, just as they had every night for 30 years. Rebecca passed first, on a Tuesday morning in early spring. She'd been painting in her studio, a portrait of the Henderson children for their grandmother, when her heart simply stopped. Marcus found her there, brush still in her hand, a small smile on her lips, surrounded by a lifetime of love captured in paint and canvas. The funeral filled the church and spilled onto the streets. People came from 5 counties, couples she'd helped save, families she'd reunited, hearts she'd helped heal. They told stories of her kindness, her wisdom, her gift for seeing beauty where others saw only brokenness. But it was Marcus's words that stayed with them. "She taught me," he said, his voice steady despite his tears, "that love ain't about deserving each other. It's about choosing each other. Every day. In sickness and health, in plenty and want, in joy and sorrow. She chose me when the world said she shouldn't. And I chose her back. That choice, that's what made us rich." Marcus lived 2 more years, tending their garden, welcoming visitors, keeping Rebecca's memory alive in stories and the paintings that covered every wall. When his time came, he was found in his chair by the window, Rebecca's first sketch of his hands resting in his lap, a peaceful expression on his weathered face. They buried them together in the Millfield Cemetery, under a stone that read simply, "Rebecca and Marcus, beloved wife and husband." They chose love, but their real memorial wasn't carved in stone, it was written in the lives they'd touched. The cabin remained a place of healing, cared for by the community they'd served. Young couples still came to sit in their chairs and learn what love looked like when it was tested by time and trial. The walls still held Rebecca's paintings, portraits of hope, of forgiveness, of love that refused to surrender. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light slanted just right through the studio windows, visitors would swear they could feel it, that gentle presence that whispered to broken hearts, "You are not too much. You are not too little. You are exactly enough for the person meant to love you. Choose love. Every day. In every way. Choose love." The town of Millfield grew and changed over the decades. New families moved in, old ones passed on. But one thing remained constant: the story of the slave boy and the sheriff's daughter who proved that love, real love, doesn't ask permission from the world. It just chooses, and keeps choosing, until the very end. And sometimes, if you know how to look, even beyond the end. Their love had become legend. Their choice had become legacy. And in a world that often forgot what love looked like, their story reminded everyone who heard it. This is how you love. This is how you choose. This is how you build something beautiful from broken pieces. This is how love wins. If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. Love has always found a way to bloom in the most impossible places, between the most unlikely people, against the greatest odds. Subscribe to hear more stories of courage, hope, and hearts that refused to surrender. Stories of people who chose love when the world told them not to. Stories that remind us all, you are worthy of being chosen. You are worthy of being seen. You are worthy of a love that doesn't ask you to be smaller, quieter, or less than who you are. Hit that subscribe button, and let's discover together how love always finds a way to win. Because every heart has a story worth telling, and every love has a legacy worth leaving.